Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all my blessed beloveds out there in video land. You're watching Living and Thriving with Rusty, and I'm Rusty. And as you can see, I just got off the road from a hellacious drive from upper Maine to Florida, southern Florida. And I think y'all need to slow the F down because I ain't dying because you think you're Aquaman, okay? Just saying, slow the down. I saw between Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia area to Tampa, 38 accidents, maybe 39. And I saw people being airlifted. I saw dead people, literally dead people with the blinkers flashing and their bodies dead. And like, really, was it worth it? Slow down. Don't be an asshole. That's all I can say about that. I ain't dying because you're an asshole. Not today. Ain't gonna happen. Today I have Henya on somewhere. She's trying to figure out how to get on, and I'm trying to figure out how to get her on. We're having Mercury retrograde issues, and I'm very, very much asleep. But I love Henya, so she is worth the time. And I'm trying to see where she is, so give me uno momento. So I'm super excited. We finally found each other. Whatever technological issues we had again, and Mercury in retrograde can go, we're together. And Henya's going to talk to us about what it was like to be raised by parents who survived the Holocaust. And this story and messaging is so important to me because I don't want it to get lost in history. I don't want people to forget about that horrible time. And I don't want people to forget about the long-term trauma and pain that caused many generations. And Hannah's living proof that you can be beautiful and wise and amazing and survive and get through it and have faith. And I'm so happy to see you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
So Henya, who are you? What do you do? And what makes you you?
Oh, that's a loaded question, but I'll do my best to answer it. Who am I? I think I discussed that earlier with you, but I will mention it again. I was born in France, raised in Israel to Polish parents. And I lived in Israel until I was 17 years old. And then we immigrated to the United States. I'm here most of my life. But I do go back to Israel quite often because I just love being there. It feels like home, you know, speak my language and eat my food, that type of thing. I'm a writer, as you know, and I like to write psychological thrillers. I like to dabble in people's minds. And something that I was raised to do. Unknowingly, my parents taught me how to be watchful, always watchful. They had a very difficult background, and I wish I knew all of that. My father was totally numb about it. He never spoke about it. Even my mother didn't really know what he went through in Auschwitz. I know a little bit about my mother. She was in Siberia for 10 years during the war. So maybe she was a little better off than being in a concentration camp, but it left a terrible mark on her. So who am I? I'm a product of parents who suffered greatly and never got over it. Uh, the whole life was stamped by what was done to them. I know some people who went through all of this and were able to rise above and beyond what they suffered, but not my parents. So, not that they were not good people, it's just that they didn't know how to. My mother was, I think, 14 when the war broke. My father was just as young. So when he arrived at the concentration camp, I believe that he was 18, if not younger, 18 years old. So when he got out of concentration camp, I was told that he weighed 85 or 90 pounds. So that was something that if you saw pictures, anybody saw pictures. And the thing that is very difficult for me is to read the anti-Semitic remarks by some people who say the Nazis knew what they were doing. The Nazis were right. And it's very painful. It's also painful to realize that a lot of young Jewish people are not in connection with the background. They are not really aware that history can repeat itself. I might be sounding a little, not a little, I'm not naive, let's put it this way. I knowing the history, not only the Jewish people, but in general, history does repeat itself. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it was very difficult to be raised by such parents because they had no idea how to raise us. They just knew that I needed to act properly, that I needed to be careful what people thought of me. That can be a product of where they came from. So I was bound tightly by their needs and their, how shall I say in the nicest way possible, their mood swings, their depression. My mother would literally lie in bed for days at a time with the shades closed. We couldn't make a sound, my brother and I. If we did, she would wake up in a fury and we would get whacked for doing that. She had terrible headaches. And if you met my mother, she's not alive, bless her soul. If you met her, this is the first thing she would tell you, how she suffered. So she was never able to leave this behind her. Not that she can, but it's possible to build upon your suffering. You know, if you know how to do it and you have a strong personality, you rise above it. You never forget, it's impossible, but you rise above it. My parents were never able to do that.
I don't know if they ever had the tools to do that though. And I feel really horrible that your mom and father just stayed locked in that PTSD, in that trauma. But I don't know if anybody ever gave any of them tools when they came out of the concentration camps, or even knew how to articulate what tips and tricks they could use to be healthier and be better. I mean, that's a pretty ominous way to grow up, and watching people around you die and not know if you're the next person. And larger than that, when you become free, so to speak, how do you move on with your life when those images and that fear is constantly percolating? I mean, my God.
And you are right. Although I did come across a number of people who came out of that situation and were able to overcome it by fighting against it. And you're right, my parents didn't have the tools. Absolutely. It's a good insight. And it's difficult even nowadays after all these years to be able to forgive. I understand what they went through. What I had to grapple all of my life with is being the brunt of their anger, frustration, which, you know, I was a victim as well. So I didn't know better. I didn't know what was going on. So it was very difficult for me to forgive them. I'm trying to be a little bit more understanding now that they've been dead for so many years, that when I look back, I say, okay, you know, because if I don't do that, I will be stunted myself. But one thing that my parents taught me, my mother especially, is to be tough, is to fight for myself, So let me give you an example. When I was 4 years old, and we were very poor, and we lived literally in the gutters. That if I would come home crying, if somebody beat me up, I would come home crying. My mother would beat me up and say, now go out there and do this to whoever does it to you. So I learned to be tough. It was a very harsh lesson, but the way I am right now is because of that. There were nice things that they taught me. My mother taught me to be clean. She taught me to look presentable. She taught me to take care of myself. Um, and she thought she was a good mother because she was there, but she wasn't there. She was physically there, but not mentally there. So the way she saw it was, I put food on the table, I make sure that you are clean, I make sure that I wash your clothes, I make sure the house is clean, I make sure that you present yourself nicely. But on the other hand, I'll beat you to death if you don't do what I tell you to do. So there was the good and there was the bad. My brother who's younger and my half brother, and he came with my stepfather. He didn't get that because I think by the time he showed up, and being a male, my parents attributed a great deal of importance to a person being a male, not a female. So as soon as I turned 17 or 16, 17, they wanted to marry me off. But I was different. I fought that. I, when they said black, I did white. When they said whatever they said, once I became a teenager, I started to fight back, and they didn't like it. So the more I fought back, the more they distanced themselves from me. The more I fought back, their love became more and more conditional. So it was a constant battle. And that's why when I met my husband, we married after I knew him for 3 weeks. We lived in New Jersey, and I never had a good relationship with my parents. Not really. There was always a problem there. So when my husband said to me, let's get married and move to California, I said, California, far away from home, far away from my parents. That's my opportunity to run away from home. And that's what I did, not even knowing whom I'm marrying. I mean, he seemed like a nice guy, but I was 19, he was 21. What did I know? I didn't have the background to be a whole person yet. But at that moment, all I thought was far away from my parents. But it wasn't far enough. It wasn't far enough. The tie between us was very tight. And the sense of shame and the sense of guilt was always with me, because they always made me feel guilty and shameful for whatever they thought I did wrong. So even then I wasn't able to break away from them. So there were maybe a year or two along the line that I didn't speak with them, that I said, I'm divorcing myself from you. But then something always sent me back to them, wanting to fix things. I always wanted to fix. So when my parents used to get into a scuffle, and I'm being very kind, I used to get in the middle between the two of them and try to separate them. But it came to bite me back, because then the fury that they had towards each other now compounded on me. And I learned, and it took me a long time to learn that, because even now, I have the tendency of wanting to fix people, to fix things. That's why for me to write psychological thrillers, I'm trying to fix my characters. I put them in a bind, and then I try to get them out of the bind. So in that respect, it makes it very easy for me to write this kind of genre.
So are you still married to the man that you married at 19?
So it was a very rocky relationship because I hardly spoke English and my husband is American. So we used to fight and we didn't really understand half of the time why we are fighting. So there was a power play there and we were too young to really understand what was happening. Then we had our son while we were in California. And we came back to New York, and things got worse and worse and worse. My husband started drinking, and he had a power position, and it got into his head. And I said I wanted a divorce. So we got divorced. We were divorced for 10 years. Then we were married again, and we are still together.
Isn't that a beautiful love story? You're coming from a place of trauma that's repeated by your parents' trauma into a marriage that was convenience with a son who I imagine you just loved to death. And you step away and you heal and you come back because you know that you love each other. Is that what eventually you figured out?
Well, to be honest with you, I dated a lot while we were away from each other, divorced. And I kept finding myself comparing everybody to my husband, to my ex-husband. And so I was never able to forge another relationship, a meaningful relationship with somebody else. So when my husband wanted to get together, he's the one who pursued me. And he also had other relationships. I didn't really want to, but he kept pursuing me. And I said, okay. We were in a restaurant. He took me out to a restaurant, and he was still drinking at the time. So we each had a glass of wine in front of us. And he said to me, I want to get together with you. I want to marry you. And I said, as long as you do that, I pointed to the glass of wine. I said, there's no way I'll even consider it. He took that glass of wine that wasn't even finished, pushed it to the side, and hasn't touched a drink since then.
Wow.
Has not touched a drink. So that showed me that there was a commitment there. And believe it or not, we still had to work very hard because we had a very turbulent marriage. So we had to work very hard to smooth things out. And it took years. It wasn't that easy. But the commitment is there. So I think that's important, is to have a commitment to the relationship, is for better or for worse, no matter what, how bad it can be, is to work on it and be there for each other. So another lesson that I learned from my parents, instead of holding back my feelings, I immediately discuss it. At the spur of the moment, as soon as I feel that something is wrong, I will approach that problem head on and discuss it, not to hold it back, because I saw what my parents held back. They held back so much that they were ballooned with problems and festered with all the badness that happened to them in their lives, instead of just letting it go and moving on.
I don't know how anybody would be not festered with problems, especially living in Auschwitz. You know, that's just, if you don't have the tool set
Right.
to get out of that beginning, you know, they say that when you are traumatized, you're stuck at that age, meaning your parents, your mom was stuck at 14, your dad was stuck at 18 or under in that time period. And didn't know how to grow up and grow out of it. They just repeated the pain because that's all they expected. Like, the generational continuation of the Holocaust is astronomical to me, and I don't think people talk about it enough. So I'm grateful for you sharing. My curiosity is, where is your son in all of this? Like, how has he gotten to a place where he's not scrappy? Is he not fearful? Like, how has that generational difference gotten to your son?
It was embedded in him. I did embed in him my background, my parents' background. And I did embed in him the importance of knowing where you came from and what to do with it. So he doesn't fully understand, but what came out of it, that Danny is my son, that he watches and he studies, literally studies the Nazis and that whole era. If you want to know anything about that, he knows more than I do. He studies it, and he reads it, and he watches it, and he lives it. So it is embedded within him, and he has a love for our roots, because we are not religious. We never were religious. I didn't raise him to be religious because I got the cynical stance from my mother, who didn't believe in religion, although my brother became very religious. But what I did install in him, and it's a dirty word nowadays, is Zionism, which is not really bad in itself. It's just a love for something, a love for your background, that you need to be in touch with, for the rest of your life, because you need to know where you came from to be able to continue on. You don't have to, you can intermarriage, you can date, from other religion, but you need to know where you came from. And that's what I instilled in him. So he is aware, and I don't think that he's aware to that deep level, but maybe watching all the movies and studying what the Germans were all about, the Nazis at that period, and what happened with the Jews, which, but as I said, by far he knows about it more than I do, that he's a third generation, then he's definitely a third generation survivor. And it does get watered down with each generation. It definitely does. As a matter of fact, I just finished writing an article about racism, that it takes generations to get to this point. And I just finished watching To Kill a Mockingbird for the second, third, or fourth time. And it got me to think that the message there is, these people didn't know any better. They were raised with it. They were bred into it in school, by the parents, by the pastors. So here, these children are growing up this way. You cannot blame them for feeling the way they're feeling. And it took generation and generation. My point when I wrote this article is that it's going to take generations and generations to strip that away from people, that hate, that has no meaning. It doesn't mean anything. It's just something that you feel it and you know about it. So the same thing with this is generations and generations. It has to stay alive because it can happen any day now. It can happen anytime. And that's how I believe in it. I believe that stuff like this can happen. And it is happening. If you go to Africa and you go to other countries, it didn't only happen to the Jews. It's not only happening to the Jews. This is evil.
Well, it's still happening here in the United States. And it's dumbfounding to me that we are in a time period where we are the wealthiest country in the world. We have some of the most amazing tools and resources to be the smartest country in the world. And yet there are individuals who are trying to prevent history, truthful history, from being taught in our schools because they don't want children to know the truth. And I sit back going, this is why, if I ever rephrase that, when I become president of the United States, it will be mandatory that everybody will have to travel, because you don't know what you don't know until you know. And that embedded racism, that community orchestrated racism, is so prevalent in 2021. It blows my mind. But most of those people have never gotten out of their own town, much less out of their own community thinking. So how would they actually know better?
Exactly. Very well said. Yes. So maybe I shouldn't get into it, but the cancel culture drives me crazy. It really does. When you now in school that you want to strip the curricula down to nothing, to whitewash everything. You know, you should take those instances and just teach the children that those were the times. We don't think like this anymore. We are changing, and look how much we've changed from that time where the Black people were persecuted, you know, were brought in and tortured in so many ways. But don't strip that history down to nothing, because these Black kids should know who George Washington was, who all these white leaders were. They need to know where they come from. Don't strip it, because, you know, you can't change history. So the cancel culture is driving me absolutely out of my mind. And I think a lot of people feel like that.
I think that there is a legitimate way to utilize cancellation of something versus annihilation. So what, you know, Auschwitz is still around. They still have it as a museum. You still get to walk there. You still get to feel it. You get to, you know, embark on the ghosts of the past, which I truly appreciate, because there's nothing more chilling than seeing the truth. Now, in our country, we annihilate history. We rub it out and try to erase it and try to hide it and try to pretend that it doesn't exist in some theory to prevent it from the future. And I think that's very opposite and not as effectual as saying, okay, this is what happened. Here's the reality between the Native Americans, what we did to them, what we did to brown skinned people in general, what we did to women in general, how we utilized women in Puerto Rico as test subjects for the birth control pill. You know, these are facts. These are historical facts of things we did to undermine other races based off of some arrogance that I don't understand. And I don't know if I will ever understand, but at least I know it's there. And I think for the generations coming forward, instead of annihilating the history, we need to embrace it and understand that these were stepping stones and we're not different. We're not those people anymore. We're different. And I agree with you on that. But the precipice here in the United States is really, there's a real fight to keep that ongoing story of difference and divisiveness. And it'll take a whole entire 50,000 million different shows to get to the root of that problem and how we can change that. But in 30 seconds or less, how do you, Henya, think that you've changed the story of your people and history and sadness and betrayal in a lot of ways to help move forward the generations?
So, but first of all, the first thing I'm thinking about is being strong. Is first of all being aware, and then being strong, and understanding where I came from and rising above it. There's a mindfulness. You have to bring it to the forefront. It can't deal with emotion the whole time, because emotions sometimes shouldn't be the driving force. So I believe in rising above and beyond, that if I cannot do something, if you tell me I cannot do something, I will do it. If I have an opinion, I will voice my opinion. And my friends know that. So I am very outspoken about where we came from and the Jewishness of it. I'm very outspoken about it. And I don't care who listens. And I don't care. And I write articles about it as well. Some publishers will not publish it. Others will. I know who will. So that's how I bring my point across, is by writing it down and putting it out there, and by being strong.
Henya, I think you are a beautiful soul. I am so glad we were able to connect. I hope that we can remain friends and connect in the future again, because you have a beautiful story. We do have to work on your internet bandwidth because it is really low. So we'll work on that. But I want you on again as many times as possible, because I don't want the history to be erased. And I want people to understand the depth of the Holocaust and how many generations it really is going to take to heal that. I can only imagine what it's like to be African American or Asian American, or, well, I am Indian American, but you know, it's years and years and years of healing and trust. And trust is the hugest part, I think, because most people don't trust each other, and we can get into that next call. Henya, where can we find more information about you?
So on Amazon, it will be henyadrescher.com, and medium.com, Henya Drescher. That's where you'll find most of my writing, and my book is on Amazon.
And I am now a fan of yours on medium.com. I get to read your work, so I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, my friend. I'll talk to you soon. Be blessed.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're watching Living and Thriving with Rustie. I'm Rustie, and this is what I get to do. How fantastic. Oh my God, I can't even tell you the goosebumps and the chills and the love that I send her way. She is a beautiful soul, rocking the world, paving the way with understanding, compassion, and clarity. Yeah, she's right. Cancel culture sucks. And yet I think in some respects we can use it as a tool versus as annihilation. So are you really canceling something, or are you totally annihilating it, trying to prevent and rub it out from the storyline? Unfortunately, when you do the annihilation thing and you try to rub it out, it comes back, it seeps back. That story is never going to stop screaming, hello, I'm here, I want to be heard, no matter what you do. Will you become compassionate? Will you become more empathetic? Will you research? Will you talk to people? Will you buy somebody a cup of coffee just because? What way do you show up in life, and how do you tell your story? That's the question I want to know. Until next time, know that you're loved, know that you're beautiful, do beautiful things, because the world is so ugly sometimes. And I'm going to finally go take a shower after a 27-hour drive from New England. Be well.